So Shawn, to kick us off this morning, and thank you for joining us so early, we welcome your introduction and a little bit of history about the United Nations Command and the Armistice Agreement.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. As General Johnson said, I was asked to lead off the panel with a short discussion on the United Nations Command, its origins, how it evolved, and factors which still make it relevant today. It is an honor to offer some words to such a distinguished panel for the Korean Defense Veterans Association. I'll take the next few minutes to briefly frame some of the interesting facets of the command's history and offer some clarity to several little-known aspects on the UNC and its relationship to the United States and the Republic of Korea. To help understand what the UNC is, one has to go back to its beginnings. The UNC was born in the first days and weeks of the Korean War, driven by the American response and international, mostly non-communist outrage over the naked aggression of the North's 25 June 1950 invasion. The United Nations was in its infancy, just 5 years old at this point. The United States and a few other powers were already engaged in combat operations in support of South Korea against the North's forces when the Security Council acted. The United States helped draft UNSCR 84, which bestowed UN legitimacy to a US-led international response. This is a key point that has often been lost over the years due to the command's naming and its use of the UN flag. The United States is the nation responsible for leading the UNC. However, the US is limited in how it can use the command, respecting the legitimacy and mandate of the authorizing UNSCRs. The UNC's connective tissue to the UN and the Security Council are limited, but significant. First and foremost, the UN Secretary General and the Security Council bestowed on the US-led command the honor to fly the UN flag during the course of its operations. Second is the UNC reporting on its activities through the US government to the Security Council, which since 1953 has typically been annually. I will not discuss in detail the UNC's role in prosecuting the Korean War, except to convey a few key points which relate to the UNC today. First, the UNC was a belligerent in the war and has served as the vehicle to marshal international military support for the defense of Korea, exercising operational control over and providing support to the multinational combat forces. In conjunction with the passing of Resolution 84 on 7 July 1950, the Korean president placed his armed forces under the control of the UNC for the course of the war. This practice continued after the war as part of the Iraq-US Mutual Defense Treaty until 1978, when UNC transferred its warfighting mission to the bilaterally controlled Combined Forces Command, or CFC. In late July 1950, in response to the significant humanitarian crisis in Korea, the UNC was bestowed by the Security Council through UNSCR 85 as the agency for coordinating international humanitarian support, as it was the only organized body in Korea which could handle the task at the time. As the vehicle for organizing multinational forces, prosecuting the war, and later maintaining friendly compliance to the Armistice Agreement, the US government negotiated several agreements with both South Korea and the Japanese governments on behalf of the multinational forces. The two most important in terms of today were the Meyer Agreement with the Republic of Korea in 1952 and the UN-Japan SOFA of 1954. While the Meyer Agreement was largely economic in nature, one subparagraph provided legal privileges and immunities for the multinational forces to operate in Korea as belligerents. The ambiguous nature of the legal status for sending state forces during crisis or combat is presently a barrier to more active involvement by the sending states and may prevent their timely support in a crisis. The UN-Japan SOFA provides the legal privileges for selected sending state forces to operate in and from Japan. This agreement later served as the legal foundation after 1957, when the UNC moved to Korea and for Japan to designate UN bases for these UNC forces to operate from. The strategic importance of the UN bases and this SOFA for the rapid deployment of sending state military forces in a crisis has been underappreciated and probably requires additional focus to better posture an armistice to leverage in a crisis. The Armistice Agreement was intended to serve as a temporary halt to the fighting so that political arrangement could formally end the conflict. The Military Armistice Commission, or MAC, composed of military officers from each side, was designed to carry out reciprocal supervision, observation, inspection, and investigative functions inside the DMZ, maintain a dialogue between the parties, and to conclude agreements to modify the armistice when necessary. The MAC no longer functions as intended, having been supplanted by the UNC Korean People's Army General Officer talks in 1998. The MAC and its replacement serve a valuable purpose as they have allowed military-to-military contact when political avenues remain limited or closed. Most UNC combat forces were withdrawn in 1954. Token forces remained after 1955, with the last sending state forces departing Korea in 1971 and Japan in 1976, leaving only ceremonial forces and the liaison groups. Sending state interest waned in the 1970s, with more than half ceasing active involvement, but with most returning in the 1990s and early 2000s. The US, recognizing that times were changing, conducted a study in 1965, which explored alternative pathways for the UNC and the US security relationship with the Republic of Korea. The decade of 1968 to 1978 observed the most significant change in the ROK-US alliance and its relationship to the UNC. From the establishment of the bilateral operational planning staff in 1966, the formation of the Security Consultative Meeting Body in 1968, the formation of the First Corps ROK-US Group in 1971, what was an integrated field army headquarters, and the creation of the US-Korean battle staff concept and the fusion of the Korean ULCHI and UNC focus lens exercises in 1975, followed by the creation of the Military Committee in 1977, all set in motion the formation of the CFC in 1978. All of this was done on UNC's watch with their, collaboratively with their Korean partners. When CFC arrived on the scene, the UNC was deliberately placed into the background. The UNC continued its armistice maintenance functions, maintained the UN-Japan SOFA, and was available to resume its role as the active vehicle for multinational integration to defend Korea should hostilities resume. UNC has faced some challenges over the last 4 decades after it transferred the warfighter role to CFC. The first challenge is UNC's use of other commands' manpower in a double or triple-headed fashion, where UNC duties became more ceremonial than actual. The lack of dedicated manpower led to a loss in institutional knowledge in what the UNC is and what it can or should do. Virtually every UNC commander since 1978 observed this problem, with incremental changes occurring over time. The second challenge, exacerbated by the previous point, is one of identity, with UNC and its role not properly appreciated nor integrated into the overall international and bilateral alliance defense construct. The dichotomy of UNC as the International Military Command, which is, in effect, in support of a bilateral military alliance, is not lost on many of our sending state partners. Absent a concerted effort by both Korea and the US to court sending state involvement, will limit the utility of the UNC to leverage the latent military power of the sending states in crisis or in a resumption of hostilities. For if anything, North Korea has proven itself with its decades of extremely violent behavior, including its many unambiguous attacks on both the US and Korea, to be remarkably astute at operating inside the decisions trade space of the US and South Korea. However, at some point, North Korea could misjudge and overplay its hand, as they did on June 25th, 1950, with possibly disastrous results leading to a chain of events that cannot be de-escalated. And that is where the effort to make UNC an active, integrated partner will pay off. Thank you, sir.
Shawn, that was great and easy to see why you've been asked to come back to USFK as the Deputy J5. Thanks for that this morning, setting the conditions for this discussion.